Yes, thank you, Anna-Kaisa, and thanks for the opportunity to be talking here today. Indeed, I'm Matti, or Veli-Matti, both are okay, and I'll be talking about gaming disorder, which is more colloquially known as game addiction in everyday language. I'm a researcher, indeed, from University of Jyväskylä. I have been working on research around play and games for 15 years, and I have an intro slide coming next. But before that, I just acknowledge our current funding is coming from the EU, and we have been working on this topic with other fundings as well, but the current talk will not be focusing on the work that we are doing right now, but sort of the past thing and on a general perspective to this topic, and feel free to ask all your interesting questions at the end. So a little bit about my personal background. I very originally come from philosophy, and I did a theoretical PhD on gaming about 10 years ago, and the last 8 years the focus has been on psychology of play in general, all different things from motivation to these sorts of psychiatric topics as well. And currently we are looking at tech use in general, not only games but also other things that play. From a philosophy of psychiatry perspective and phenomenological perspective, also very much interested in design analysis. I won't be tackling that specific topic here today that much, but very happy to answer any questions that you might have related to that. The reason why I got interested in this topic was I think it was about 10 years ago, having already done research on games for quite a long time. And a lot of my friends and colleagues started asking, even family members in some Christmas parties where you talk about this, and then you are the person who has been researching games, and then people ask, does this game addiction exist? We started seeing this coming to the news headlines also in Finland approximately 10 years ago. Of course, much longer it goes back, but specifically about 10 years ago. And I got curious about this question for a number of reasons, because of my philosophical interest in the question of how do we conceptualize and understand something like addiction, and specifically when it comes to games, it seems like such a complicated thing to understand and study. So I sort of moved into this field little by little. And we could start by a little historical review about this topic. So when we talk about gaming disorder, the term is basically the same as you would hear in everyday language in online or offline environments where people talk about game addiction, but this is a formal term. Originally, we see the first mentions of this concept already more than 40 years ago. First, we would see things like play addiction discussed already in the 70s. After that, we start seeing more scientific concepts like computer addiction. So we have explicit studies addressing, using this term. Computer game dependence comes in the 90s with video game addiction in some of the papers. Internet addiction has a very specific year in 1998 because a researcher called Kimberly Young published a book with a review of a number of case studies where there were people who had been experiencing problems with internet or computers, and she collected all of them into a book that is still available. At the same year, she also published this internet addiction test paper, which is one of the most cited papers in all science in this field. At least 10,000 citations have been coming by today, where she took the criteria of gambling addiction, changed that into internet, and allowed people to be tested for these sort of internet addiction concept. Well, game addiction became more prevalent in the 2000s. Then we have pathological gaming, problem gaming, more sort of a pushback term that let's not pathologize that much, but talk about problems in general. I think that was trendy about 10 years ago. And then we have internet use disorder, which was technically taken into use. I think China's military hospital in Beijing was the first one to start using it for diagnosis. And then, for some reason, it was changed in the US, who have their own diagnostic manual for psychiatric disorders, the DSM-5, so Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Disorders. They took it into the third section, which is not for official diagnosis, but for further research. And this happened 11 years ago, 2013. Then, just a couple of years ago, the World Health Organization took, in their International Classification of Diseases, the first official formal use for this diagnosis, and that's the term gaming disorder that you see in the title as well. So now it's being diagnosed in some countries around the world. Different countries, of course, use different manuals, so it's not very consistent. But technically speaking, it is now formally possible to diagnose, and that makes it very temporary for our discussion and research as well, of course. I'll be going deeper into these concepts soon. But a little bit of philosophy first. So, as I mentioned earlier, I was very interested in understanding what addiction would be for a philosopher or just for a layperson. Here you see in the slide COVID, which is so the COVID virus, technically speaking. So you can see it, you can touch it, you can put it in a Petri dish. You can very materially, concretely do testing with this specific object. But when we talk about any mental disorder, they are not like this. They are concepts like depression, something that is very prevalent, very known by people, and many people have a lot of problems related to this concept. But it's very different in a sense that you cannot put it in a Petri dish, you cannot do material testing on it, but it is an agreement where people have agreed that let's think about this symptom, this symptom, this symptom. You can see it in this slide, where we have 9 symptoms selected, and when these things are present, we observe them, we look at them, then we can agree there is a case of depression. That's how it works in practice. So there is no way of taking a, say, blood test and confirming that there's a depression. There's a lot of research being done on depression, obviously. One of my favorite research, Zyko Fried, on this topic, has done a number of interesting papers like this one, where a couple of years ago they took the field test for the American Diagnostic Statistical and Manual, which has a number of symptoms listed. And based on the available data, they simulated 30 cases where we have actual confirmed case of depression in 30 people. Now, if you take 2 qualified psychiatrists who have been educated in identifying this thing, you see that more than half disagree whether there is or is not depression. It's very, very difficult to actually identify depression in real life. So you can see those green ones are cases where both agree depression is present. It's about 40% of the cases. And in the other cases, the blue ones, one thinks there is, and the other one thinks there is not. And in the yellow cases, both think there is not, while the fact remains, in all cases, it is present. So even in something as obvious and something as prevalent as depression, we still don't know, we cannot know in real life very easily whether it's there or not. Another example from Aiko's papers 2017 is when he took all those measures that are being used to diagnose depression in people, and this explains some of that variety. Aiko found 52 different symptoms for depression, depending on which manual you're following, which measure or scale you're following. Because you have 52 different symptoms, it's obviously very, very difficult to have agreement on whether something is present or not. And the same obviously applies to gaming disorders. So we have very different understandings of what this could be, what could be the criteria, how would we think about this concept in terms of its identification. So concepts like this, they don't exist, philosophically speaking, or very materially speaking. They are just useful in practice, or at least some experts have decided that they are useful in practice. So not a matter of truth, but about politics and practice. I use the word politics here because, as said, different countries use different manuals, different researchers use different symptoms that are in different countries, and here in Finland, for instance, we don't have the official ICD-11 in use yet. I think they mentioned last week that it would be coming in 2026. So before that, we don't have that. So it's a really complex sort of a political and practical and cultural thing to talk about this thing. But let's take a closer look at what the research field looks like. Now, this gets a little bit technical, but I'm sure you can follow me. I'm trying to be as clear as I can. Here is a list of the measures that have been used to study gaming disorder around the world. All those little abbreviations that you see are a specific measure developed for measuring gaming disorder, either using the DSM-5, so the American manual, or the ICD-11, which is the World Health Organization's manual. And both of them have criteria. DSM-5 has 9, and ICD-11 has 3. And we looked at all these measures one by one. We looked at the descriptions that they're using one by one. And what you find out is that researchers are using them in a very, very different ways. So when you see this empty circle, it means they decided not to take that symptom at all. When you see full black dot, it means they've been taking it fully into consideration, and half one is just like they briefly mention it or touch on it, but not fully utilize that. And you can see there's only one measure which has all of them, the GDT, here at the bottom, which takes all those 3 criteria into use. And obviously, as you can think, the field is really messy because of this sort of measurement problems, but also because of other problems. A couple of years ago, we surveyed the whole Finnish population in a representative survey using these measures. And what we find out is something like this. So you see a circle where the red circle is the current criteria from the WHO. The blue circle is the American manual, DSM-5, and the green is self-assessed, so if people think themselves that they have often problems with their gaming. And then the big yellow circle is sort of the old criteria that I mentioned earlier, this Kimberly-Young's sort of a general test using the very old 90s criteria. And as you can see, the overlap is not very good in a sense that there can be a lot of people who meet one criteria, a lot of people who meet other criteria, and there's a little place where all of those criteria are met. But it gets even more complicated after that, because even those people might not really be the population that we are interested in when we talk about these sorts of problems. Also, a few years ago, we went to a clinic. We talked to 6 people who agreed to be interviewed for research, and we find out that 0 out of them actually meet the World Health Organization's criteria. So they are in a treatment seeking center, and they have applied to get treatment, but they don't meet the criteria. There was 1 person out of the 6 who met the DSM criteria, and 2 of them met the old 90s criteria. So something weird is going on, because there's also another circle of people who go to the treatment. They don't meet any of the criteria, but they still go to the treatment. So it seems like the state of research is not really good at the moment. So one of the reasons derives from this. If we think about gaming or problems related to gaming, however we want to frame that, the term gaming is very vague, not only in English, but other languages as well. I don't think I even want to start that debate. It's a very long conversation. But happy to have those questions later. I'd be happy to chat. But first use of English in Old English, gaming used to mean merrymaking, whatever that means. But starting from 1501, we see gaming specifically referring to gambling activities. Now, starting from 1955, we see the first time gaming used to refer to role-playing, and from 76, the first time referring to video game play. And currently, all these things remain in active use. So when people talk about their problems related to gaming, it could be any of these things in any possible ways. So let's next look at that specific treatment seeker data that exists in Finland. So we collaborated again a few years ago with a Finnish treatment seeking center called Restart. If someone has problems with gaming and you think you need help, you can just Google it and go there. It's a really wonderful program, totally free, and they have experts who provide help. At this time, when we were collaborating with them, they had 112 people in the treatment. And here is a list of games that these people found to be problematic for them in a number of different ways. So, as you perhaps might expect, at the top of the list, you see esports games or competitive games like League of Legends, Counter-Strike, Dota, stuff like this. So probably also related to the fact that these games are just so immensely popular that if you take a random sample, you will just have more people playing these games. That's obvious, but probably for other reasons too that maybe you want to talk about after the talk. Then you see MMOs, obviously, so World of Warcraft and others, Guild Wars, things like this. Then we have a number of single-player games, which is a little bit surprising, but still there's a number of single-player games. I think Assassin's Creed is there, Dark Souls is there. And then we have a few mobile games, Clash Royale and Horse, and these kinds of games that I think many people have at least heard of. And then we have what is perhaps the most interesting one is at the top of the list, where we have gamble-like titles. So that refers to sort of social casino games, games that are basically, mechanically speaking, gambling games, but you cannot get any money out of the games. Perhaps some of you are familiar with this, but even people who I work with in games haven't really played these games because they are so far away from our sort of a core understanding of what gaming is. But they are, technically speaking, gambling games that you cannot take any winnings out of. And then we have titles reported only once. So this list includes a lot of different titles from around, genres. But something that is included there is browser games that could be very classical ones, such as what would I say, like Mahjong or these kinds of things that you can imagine. So based on this data that we came up with that collaboration with Restart, I'm going to give you 5 different categories of problems that people reported. So this is coming from those people who were in the center. This is by no means a comprehensive list, but it is based on these people's experiences. So I'm going to give you a couple of quotes, and then I'll go one by one of these categories. Now, the first category is social reasons. So people went to seek treatment because they desired to comply or improve socially. And here are a couple of examples. One person says, I would like to have my gaming under control in a way that it would not interfere with my relationship. So this is, I think, perhaps the most common one. So there is a conflict between partners, or it could also be other people, friends or relatives, where the person is just spending too much time and wants to sort of spend less time so that there would be more time for other things. My wife told me I need this, so this sort of a dynamic also sometimes present where the person might not themselves think they have a problem, but perhaps their partner does, and then they either comply or they have agreed that there's a reason to seek treatment or just have somebody to sort of reconciliate the situation. And finally, my husband and daughter need me, but I just play console all day. I have anxiety disorder and severe depression. So the situations are quite complex, but essentially it is at the very center of these cases where there is a social reason, that there's a conflict between multiple people. Second category, existential reasons. Now this gets really sort of complicated. Desire to reclaim lost meaning in gaming and life. So there's 2 separate domains here. One of them relate to the fact that the person finds gaming very meaningful, and the other is the meaning that is present in life. Although I get my responsibilities done, gaming has started to feel like a forced activity, not intrinsically fun, but instead of doing fun things, I just end up gaming. There is no joy in it. So for this person, it's kind of unclear what the problem is in a very easy way. Like, it's very difficult to put it in terms, but the person would like to kind of have gaming being enjoyable, but it is no more enjoyable. So there is a sort of a desire to go and do other meaningful things. I don't know. It allows for multiple interpretations. Success in this video game is the most meaningful thing in my life. I want to reduce the meaning of gaming in my life. So the person does find playing this game very meaningful and highly meaningful, but the person wouldn't like to find that game meaningful. I guess very similar to the previous case as well. Like there is something that they would rather find meaningful, but perhaps there is no other thing. And finally, I'd like to replace my gaming with real life, and the quotation mark here is from the original person's quote. So it's unclear what that real life is, and I bet many of us have been who have been working related to games for a long time have been asking this question a number of times. Like so, if you win an esports tournament, like why would that be different from, you know, a regular football tournament? But at the same time, some of the people are really asking this question in their life. Like, so if I manage to have a huge achievement in a game, it for some people just doesn't feel like real, and they use the sort of a square quotes here by purpose. So sort of a big existential questions seem to be part of some people's treatment seeking. Third is practical reasons, so desire to ameliorate harms. These are very simple compared to the previous one, so these are very concrete material things. I often play late until night. This leaves me with little low quality sleep. Then I'm tired and don't have energy to spend time with my children. So it's just, you know, when you're not having enough sleep, then you are tired. It's quite obvious. And some people find themselves just playing too long at night and want to have help to control that. I would like to have support for learning how to not use money in gaming. So this is one of the interesting things, that if you look any of those formal classifications of gaming disorder, they don't speak of money at all, because gambling is a different thing. There's a separate diagnosis for gambling disorder. But then again, we have a lot of people who do spend a lot of money in games, like you can imagine microtransactions or skins or things like this. And there are a number of people who do self-diagnose overspending on this. And we have talked to people who spend tens of thousands of euros per some months. And this is a problem, but it doesn't fall into the formal diagnosis. So there's sort of this in-between area where money is an issue, but it's more like compulsive shopping, if you may. Like the person is just buying too much stuff. Gaming harms my work performance and limits my life development. So again, another sort of quite simple to understand experience, where there is just too much time going to gaming, so the performance in work is being perhaps not having enough attention as the person would want, and that led them to seek treatment. Now, then there is the fourth category, which is self-perceived addiction, and this is something that is at the same time quite obvious, but also it creates this interesting loop where people, when they seek, they have already identified it in themselves, that this is something that could be classified as addiction. And because this term didn't exist a long time ago, obviously we wouldn't have these cases like 15 years ago or 20 years ago. But I will talk a little bit about this at the end of the talk. I identify as a video game addict, and video games recently led to an end of my relationship, so clear overlap with the first category as well, but it is this very strong identification as an addict is present in some of the cases. I feel that life is not in my control. I could accomplish so much, but instead of studying, going to hobbies, or carrying out responsibilities, I just open the internet and video games because it's easy. So the person has already very clearly understood the pattern that they consider problematic. They have already very detailed diagnosis of the situation, but still they keep opening the computer and go to the internet, play the games, and that's where they need help for. I've been diagnosed with general anxiety disorder, and online gaming is my default escape from anxiety and boredom. So this sort of a coping is one of the things I won't be talking about today, but in the literature, this is, I would say, perhaps the most well-studied pattern, that people have underlying issue, some sort of life situation which is either caused by trauma or some comorbidity disorder, like in this case, anxiety. And when people try to find sort of a solution to that, for some people, gaming is a sort of very easy solution. The last category, wish for support desire to share one's experience and gain guidance. So this is kind of obvious, but it overlaps with all of these previous things. So people have identified the need to either one or both of these things. I need tools to help finding myself and for identifying, controlling gaming and computer use. For instance, how to handle feelings of obligation when others go gaming and it feels that I should too. Like, I think everyone has had this experience of like one more match, you're playing with friends, it's already 1 a.m. or 2 a.m. and somebody says, let's do one more. I mean, it's not always problematic for sure, but for some people, if it's repeating day after day after day after day, perhaps they need some guidance on how to say no in these situations. I need advice for how to quit gaming and how to avoid spending money on it and running into debt. So again, one of these cases where controlling money was the issue, and I need advice for monitoring. I've learned that if I'm accountable for myself alone, I cannot take responsibility. If someone else expects me to do it, it's easier. So they just want to have a support person for doing the change. So they already know what to do, but they just need to sort of make that commitment to someone. So these were all the 5 categories that we identified in the Finnish data. Of course, the issues might be completely different in the data from other countries and other cultures. So definitely not representative of the issue globally, but I think it's a nice starting point in trying to understand what's the real situation. We're running soon out of time, but I want to introduce you this, what is known as looping effect. It was sort of conceptualized by a philosopher of science, Hacking. And the principle is you see those scientists there, and then you see those other people there, and they go in loops. So the idea is that when science creates concepts, imagine some basic concepts that we talked today, like depression or anxiety, these didn't always exist. So if you go throughout history from, I don't know, 1900 to 1950s, 70s, 90s, something like that, when these concepts are introduced, people who do suffer from things like this, it completely changes their life. It's a completely new experience in having these concepts to work with. And at the same time, when we do research on these concepts keep changing. And some of these concepts keep being removed from our use entirely. So there's a number of, for instance, disorders that have been excluded from the manuals and we don't use them anymore. So there's an interesting dynamic where we create concepts and then we change the concepts, and this is an infinite, never-ending loop. And now we have something like gaming disorder being taken into formal use in some countries, but it will definitely evolve and change in the next 10, 20 years. We will definitely, I promise you, we will have some other concept that is being used after that time. And as we saw in the examples, having that concept already makes people identify themselves through this concept. So there is this dynamic going on through gamers and the researchers who study gaming. So we don't only study phenomena, we also change them. And to end with, I don't think I have much time, but as I've talked today, there is the world, and in the world we have real phenomena. Then we have the manuals, which are sort of the formal ways of seeing the world. So for instance, in the US, they have the DSM. In other countries, we have the ICD and so on. And then we have the measures that I talked about, which are based on the manuals. And then we do the science based on the measures. Optimally, it would go like this. And then by doing that science, we can change the world. But unfortunately, as I spoke today, it doesn't go usually like this. There's not really a match between what the criteria are in the manuals and what actually people experience in the world. There's a mismatch between the measures and the manuals because people don't always include all the symptoms and they add their own things and create their own things. And then we end up doing work that is really disconnected from the real world. This is really unfortunate. But at the same time, we keep changing the world. So it's really this sort of a paradoxical situation that I'd really like to change. So what we really know, the one thing that we really know is there are some people, and we don't know how many. It could be, you know, that 100, or it could be 1,000, or it could be, we have no clue. But some people have serious problems and they seek help. That's what we know. And that's what we try to understand in the ongoing work. So what are those things? What do they think they look like? How are they related to design? How prevalent it is? Is it what's the size of the problem, and so on. But this was my last slide, so I'll let Anna-Kaisa go for questions, and perhaps we have some in the chat or the audience as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Veli-Matti, for such a kind of, very thorough, in the time slot that we have, and a kind of examination of where we are with the gaming disorder. So if audience has questions, please raise your hand. I'm going to start with one, so be prepared. So how is it now to talk with friends and family about gaming addiction? So, what have you been in situations after going into this project that the non-game people would ask about this?
Yeah, I think it's been increasingly, and it's at least in Finland, the sort of newspapers have started covering this more and more often. I don't know if it's related to the upcoming it's not social media, but it's a smartphone ban that is going to schools as well. And related to this, you often hear this question still asked. But yeah, I feel that we have currently a more balanced discussion. So it has been all extremes, like there is no addiction at all, and then there's a huge panic for the addiction. And I think what we currently have is sort of a more sophisticated and balanced conversation. So I think it's going to a good direction. But
that's good to hear. What would be your kind of shorthand sentence for anyone to, as a gaming person, to give for the people that don't know about this? Like, what do you want them to be spreading around?
Well, the one thing is that we don't know much, so I think that's something that should be kept in mind. But also the fact that, well, there are these people. Of course, it's hard to discuss about it if you don't know them. But after having met so many of these people, I know their experience, and I know there is some relationship. But maybe the key thing is to keep in mind is that we don't know what that relationship is. So we have all these interactions that we have, not only with technology, but with society and with other people, social dynamics. We use other media too, like social media and other things, and they're all connected to the current situations. And when we say often we use the term gaming-related problems, like GRPs. So instead of saying there's a specific one-way direction where gaming caused addiction, we say gaming-related problems where gaming is part of a life situation. In such.
There's a more mature kind of sense of the causalities there.
Exactly.
Yeah. Any questions from the audience? There was one in the stream, and I'm kind of also eager to know what you say about that. What are the current most widely accepted symptoms of gaming disorder? Do we have a symptom list? How do we diagnose that?
Yeah, I actually dropped that slide out because the formal criteria that are in the ICD, anyone can go and Google that, so they have this lists like word by word listed out. But in there is, for instance, continued use despite acknowledged problems. So the person acknowledges themselves that this is causing me problems, and they continue despite acknowledging that. So I think this sort of a two-part understanding of the issue is very evident. That's why we also like to ask this self-assessment. So when you ask people themselves that, would you like to play less? If a person really likes to play less and they're still playing more than they like, then there's probably something going on.
Yeah. How does so there is a different kind of definition and maybe symptom list or diagnostic for gambling disorder, but how do they essentially differ? Why do they need to be separate? Is it just the money component of it, or what's the?
That's an excellent question, and I think it's asked too rarely, because technically speaking, if you go to that ICD criterion list, it is literally, they use the exact same, so it's copy-pasted. It's the same, but they just switched gaming to gambling. So it's the exact same symptoms. Are you gambling despite experiencing problems? So it's I mean, formally they don't separate them except on a verbal level, but indeed, I think the money has some distinct features there, because indeed, when we have these known cases where people have gambled everything they own. Like you usually don't do this in a game, and you cannot even do this in a game. Of course, you can spend
Micropayments.
time. You can put it on the micropayments. But I think one of the things that they are now officially discussing is adding a formal a third layer where they would have this sort of a shopping, compulsive shopping kind of category, which would include also other online environments.
Digital purchases.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yes.
Ah. All right. Any questions from the audience? There's a lot of things to ask. There is one question, so wait for the mic to come into you. Your spot. All right.
Hey, is there any differences when talking about gaming disorder with children or adult people?
Good question.
Yeah, excellent question as well. I would say there should be, but there is not. So it is a lot of the research has been done all around the world with children, and often, like looking at it from outside, of course, I was not present in the case where the child was brought to the treatment, but reading these descriptions from outside, it looks like the parents were just not necessarily being able to set boundaries in the right way. So oftentimes, I think with children, the difficult thing is to observe whether the parents didn't follow the appropriate guidelines or whether there is some real problem going on. When it comes to adults, it's more clear because the adults have full autonomy. So if there is a problem going on, you cannot sort of compare that to any caretakers. But indeed, I definitely think children should have their own discourse with this.
Thank you for the question. How does the trending topic is, of course, the study of neurotypes. So do you have in your research anything to do with neuro divergence or any of that? How does it relate to? There's a lot of other mental issues and differences between people that are also playing some kind of role in this. But have you looked into the neurotype?
Yes.
Discussion.
It's a super interesting topic. We see this in the data that often when people end up seeking treatment, huge portion of them have, compared to the general population, there's ADHD and autism symptoms and a couple of others, also anxiety and depression. So the comorbidity is very much prevalent. And again, going back to the earlier discussion, we don't quite know, in case of ADHD and autism, we know the causality is easier in these cases because we can be quite sure that this was not triggered by something much later on. But when it comes to anxiety and depression, usually the patterns are such that person ended up, perhaps the most common case is a young person who was bullied in school. The person didn't want to go out anymore because it's bullying everywhere. So they decide to stay home, get depression, and start playing. This is a sort of this, typical scenario.
Like accumulation of the problems in
Exactly,
that sense.
yeah.
Okay. Unless there is a question from the audience, I have a final question to Veli-Matti, and then we'll move to Mink Young's presentation. So how game developers can sort of work towards a better world in this? What should they know about gaming disorder?
That's also.
Do you have any answers to that, basically, if we don't know too much about the causalities?
But I think just awareness is good. Of course, the developers have been speaking for many years about the mechanisms of monetization and retention when it comes to players, and it is difficult paradox for the designers because obviously you want to have players to play the game for a long time, but at the same time being responsible when it comes to sort of those extreme outlier cases where problems are present. So I think we all are aware that 99% of players don't have any problems. So it's this small, very small part of the player base who might have problems. So I think just acknowledging that is important and helps in terms of long-term sustainable design, because it's in the end such a small part of the player base that putting a little effort on trying to identify that and provide them sort of the help perhaps that is needed is.
And maybe future regulations will help with the guidelines of making games as well.
Yeah, definitely. EU has been pushing hard on this topic for a long time, and I think there was even this year a new regulation regarding these sort of dark design patterns, even though nobody yet knows what they are. So there is regulation of something we don't know what it is, but yeah, it might be good to sort of predict that a little bit, and that will make it easier to adapt to upcoming changes.
All right. There's a question in the chat. We'll take that and then have Mink Young to come soon after that. If it's like just a fast reply, as it was vaguely touched in the presentation, is there any data on how much is gaming used a cope or distraction compared to just say gaming because they, want to play the game?
Yeah, exactly. The other word as well. So as mentioned briefly, the coping, I would say, is the most common pattern. So whether it is bullying or social phobia or depression or anxiety, any of these things, people usually who end up in these extreme scenarios seeking treatment, it is a coping mechanism. So there is an underlying thing that is being coped with. But the other term as well, distraction, is really, really good observation, because often when we talk about, for instance, problems related to social media, it is often people who, and this is a different research topic for sure, but people say that they feel distracted throughout the day. And that feels like a completely different experience compared to all these cases. So it is just like this feeling of being distracted all the time. And definitely, I think we should give that sort of a separate attention and try to understand that in a different way.
Yeah, thank you, Veli-Matti, for this talk. And
thank you so much, everyone.